welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. It's lovely to have you. So I have finally finished reading the entire current series of A Song of Ice and Fire. Oh, this is a bad idea. I've read the whole... I'm not going to try and lift him up again. I've read the whole series. These are very chunky books. This was a long old journey. I think it's taking me almost 4 years to read the whole series. I didn't read the books back to back. I did have breaks in between them as well, which I think is why it's taken me so long. So there are 7 books currently in the series. They all range from roughly about like 600 to 1,000 pages, I believe. And they are all in the series A Song of Ice and Fire. So this is my review. I hope you enjoy it. So I didn't read the books back to back, which I personally really enjoy doing. It might just be something to do with my attention span or my concentration, but if I read this whole entire series in one go, I think I would have got very, very bored and I wouldn't have been able to appreciate the book series for what it is. And I just found that it was great just to alternate and have a bit of a break in between reading the book series. So I personally really enjoyed that. So if you're quite similar to me, where you get bored quite easily or you have like a low attention span, I would recommend just reading the book and then switching over to a different book and kind of alternating and having a bit of a break between them. Now this review is coming from somebody who has not watched the Game of Thrones TV series. I don't really know how similar it is to the books. I'm not sure about that at all. I've heard the last few seasons are not based on the books anymore because the final book hasn't been written by George R.R. Martin, so apparently the TV people had to kind of create it themselves and create the plot themselves. So I have managed to avoid spoilers for the TV show, which means that this review is purely based on the original book series. And I will try to keep this review as spoiler-free as I possibly can. So if you have not read the book series, then hopefully you'll be able to watch this video and it is not going to spoil anything for you, but just lets you know a little bit about what to expect. So I would like to start off with saying that I thoroughly enjoyed this book series. George R.R. Martin is a very talented author. But not only is his writing style brilliant, but the world building, the character development, his description and his dialogue are both brilliant. He encapsulates a lot of different personalities for different characters. And I think it's a skill to write in the viewpoint of many, many different characters and to have it all feel believable for that person. He would write chapters as a female really, really well. He would write chapters as someone who was quite nasty and evil really, really well. So for that, I really enjoyed the book series as a whole. I'm going to be completely honest with you when I say that my least favourite book was this one, which is A Feast for Crows, which number is this in the series? Is this... So this one is the 4th book, I believe. Now the only reason why I didn't enjoy this book as much, now don't get me wrong, the writing is still brilliant, you know, the author hasn't changed, the writing style is still fantastic. I just found that this one had the least amount of stuff happening in it. This one had the most amount of potential to be boring. And I did not enjoy that half the characters were not mentioned in this book at all. So you go through the first 3 books with a set amount of characters that you get to know and you get to be really invested in their plots. And then you get to this book and half of them are not in it at all, which I personally did not enjoy. I know that that was intentional because he wanted to base this book around a certain location, and if the characters were not within that realm or that location, then they weren't going to be included in the book. However, I personally didn't like that because I had some of my favourite characters that were not in this book, and therefore I had to read a very big book that didn't have anybody that I actually liked mentioned in it. Although that is my personal preference, I was just not really that gripped by this one in particular. So in terms of my favourites, I have this one, which is A Clash of Is it A Clash of Kings? Sorry, half of the cover has been eaten by my rabbit, so I can't remember the rest of the, the name of the book. I also loved the first one, so the classic A Game of Thrones, and I really, really enjoyed the most recent one, which is A Dance with Dragons Part 2. And my bunny tried to nibble this one but didn't quite get to it. So those were my favourites and least favourites in the series. Overall, I feel like the consistency was really good. I personally didn't notice any continuity errors. I felt like everything was really well thought out, which is probably why the books take so long to be released. Like, he does not fire these books out quickly at all. It is a process. It is so long before books are released in this series. However, I feel like there is a lot of planning and a lot of thought that is required in order for the books to be as good as they are. So I've spoken about a lot of the positives. I also want to touch upon a few of the negatives. So for me personally, I feel like there was a lot of gore in the books just because he could. I feel like a lot of the scenes and the gore that has been written about was purely just to create a reaction from the reader and doesn't actually, it wouldn't actually happen. I feel like there are too many overly evil people, overly cruel people. I'm going to be very careful with my terminology because I don't want this video to be banned from YouTube, so I'm just trying to be very cautious of what words I use. I just feel like not all of us wake up every day fueled with violence, but I feel like the majority of characters in A Song of Ice and Fire are that way inclined. And I feel like there were scenes that were overly graphic that really didn't need to be. Now, I don't normally mind reading gore. I can take it. One of my favourite book series is Department 19 by Will Hill, which is such a brilliant book series. That has a lot of gore, that has a lot of paragraphs in there that made me wince a little bit. However, I do feel like a lot of that was relevant and a lot of that made sense, and it felt like it wasn't every character that was doing that. It was a very specific set of characters who, because of their aims and their values, it would make sense for there to be that much gore that they elicit. However, in A Song of Ice and Fire, I just felt like there was graphic scenes just because why not? And I feel like there were too many characters that were like that, and it just doesn't make sense. Like I say, I don't mind reading it. I'm much more able to read gore than I am to watch it, which is why I am a little bit hesitant to watch the TV series. I think it's because when I see things, they stick in my mind a lot more. But when I'm reading them, I can visualise it how I want to, so I've got more control. So if there's parts that I don't want to visualise, then I won't. Whereas with a TV series, I don't get that control over what I see. There is one particular paragraph, and again, this isn't really a spoiler, and I can't remember which book it's in, but it's one of the ones towards the end, where a particular character eats a live rat, and for some reason, that paragraph sticks in my mind because it was the most disgusting for me out of the whole series. And it's not even that bad. It's not like a battle's taking place or like two characters are going at it with each other. I think it was just because the amount of detail that paragraph goes into. I just struggled to read that, and I just catch myself thinking about it sometimes at night, and I'm like, I need some serious help here. I just felt like it wasn't necessary, it wasn't needed, and it didn't contribute to the plot that much. One piece of advice that I would offer if you are going to read this book series is to try to not have a favourite character. Obviously, I'm sure that you will. It's a very hard thing to do, to not have a favourite character in a book series that you're really invested in. However, getting too attached to characters is very dangerous in this book series because you just never know what is going to happen, and for the majority of the characters, the plot does not go in their favour. So just don't do it. The easiest way and the least emotionally intense way to read this book is to not have a favourite character. I would also say as well that this book series is very slow. in terms of plot progression. So for some characters, you do have to wait absolutely ages before their plot actually progresses again. For example, there was one particular character that I was really invested in their plot and their storyline, and they had a chapter and then they were not mentioned again for about another 250 pages. And I think because there's so many characters and so many plots and storylines that are all happening alongside each other, there's a lot of information to take in, and I just feel like that if you are particularly invested in one plot, it can feel very, very slow until you find out how that plot progresses. And like I say, in a couple of these books, some of the characters are not even mentioned at all, so you might have to wait a whole book before you find out what next happens to that particular character. So again, I would say try not to get too invested in your favourite characters' plots. Try to be invested in them all equally, because if there's one plot that you are so interested in and one storyline that you're interested in, the book series is going to feel very, very slow. I would also say as well, when I read the first book, I found that there were too many characters with too similar names. And I find it really hard to picture the differences between some of these characters. There's far too many of them, and I found it really hard to remember the side characters. I didn't have this issue with the main characters, like the point of view characters that the chapters were about, but for the side characters, there were so many of them, like way, way too many, and I really struggled to remember them all. Now, I have been told that a lot of the characters have actually been removed in the TV series to make it less confusing, and that a lot of characters are blended into one, which I think will be so much more beneficial for me, because I just really struggled to visualize all these different characters. There's just way too many of them. Now, at the back of these books, they do have a list of every single character, what house they're from, what their like relatives are, and you can kind of remember who's who from that. But flicking back and forth between those back pages and the chapter all the time was really annoying. So I didn't utilize that as much as I should have, really. And I feel like as well, if you have watched the TV series and you're going in to read this book series, it might be a little bit easier to remember who's who, because you'll already have a face in your mind as to who the character is. Whereas in my mind, unless they had a very distinguishing feature, I would find it very hard to know who's who, and it just got very, very confusing. I think as well, I need to accept that the book series may never be finished, because it has been a long time since the current final book in the series has been released, and you know, he's teased the next one. There have been chapters released on the next one. However, George R.R. Martin is not getting any younger, and therefore if you are going into this book series, you need to be prepared for the fact that it may never end, which can be frustrating. However, I do feel like the ending of A Dance of Dragons Part 2, which is the current final book, I do feel like that was enough for me to be able to wait. I don't feel like it was too cliffhangery that it's annoying. There's some cliffhangers that are just such a cliffhanger that it actually is quite annoying that you can't read the next one. I didn't get that with the end of A Dance of Dragons Part 2. I felt like the end of it, although it was a cliffhanger, it was enough for me to be able to wait for the next one. And even though it may never be finished, it is still worth a read. There are so many emotions that you would go through when reading this book. I had so many ups and a lot of downs when reading this book series. It's so emotionally intense. I really, really enjoyed it, and it made me think really deeply. There was humour in the right places, there was tension in the right places. The book series is incredible, and it was a great read and a great almost 4 years of my life. And I am going to watch the TV series as well. So if you enjoyed this book review, I may do a TV series review once I have watched it, if you think that would be useful. Again, no spoilers here, but I am going to tell you who some of my favourite characters were, or the ones whose storylines I liked the most. Ned Stark is one of my favourite characters. Jon Snow, again, one of my absolute favourite characters. His plots were a little bit on the slow side, but him as a character is brilliant. I really like his personality. I like Arya Stark as well. I like Tyrion Lannister. Again, some of Tyrion's chapters have the most humour involved in them, which is really great. His chapters are great to read. And then very randomly, I also like Davos Seaworth. Is he called Davos? Davos? Again, I just really like his storylines. I like his personality. He's a great character's point of view to read from. So those are my favourite characters. I'm not going to tell you who my least favourite characters are because that potentially might be spoilery. I think my least favourite characters are probably the same as everybody's least favourite characters for the same reasons. Anyway, that is my review on the entire book series of A Song of Ice and Fire. I really hope that you enjoyed this review and that you found it entertaining or useful. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up to let me know that you did. And leave a comment below if you've read this book series and you have any reviews or any other opinions that you wanted to let me know about. That would be really, really helpful if you could share your opinions as well. Or even if you haven't read this book series yet, I'd love for you to leave me a comment and let me know how you found the video. If you liked my content and you want to see more from me, make sure to subscribe because it is free and it lets you know every time I upload a video. I will see you next time, or rather you'll see me. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.